Behind the Brand features the people who are making things happen. Get the insight to grow your biz from experts who've done it. Get behind the brand.
Hi, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Today I'm here with best-selling author Brian Solis, who's written the book The End of Business as Usual. Brian is also a principal at the famed Altimeter Group. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
One of my first questions I usually ask my guests, Brian, how did you get this job?
Craigslist. It was wonderful. I was searching one day, and lo and behold, it was a job that needed filling. I have been in marketing since a long time.
For those who don't know your background, give us.
I was in marketing, started in technology marketing in 1991, and that was because I was in sort of database development for a marketing agency, listening to how they would launch emerging companies. And being a technologist, I was always frustrated with how they would position, or lack of positioning, around what the technology was. It was always about features and speeds and feeds, and not necessarily about how that technology was going to benefit an organization, a customer, or what have you. And asked for a shot to get into it, to try a different approach, and really never looked back. But over the years, always looking ahead at what could be versus what was, and challenging tradition, and always challenging the pillars of traditional marketing. And in 1999, decided to experiment with this idea of direct-to-consumer engagement over the internet. So we're bringing businesses to where people were on the web, trying to answer questions, trying to make decisions, bypassing all of the traditional intermediaries of influence, bypassing all of the traditional destinations for influence. And it was at that moment that I realized, I was doing this experiment in the mid-90s, and it was the lack of skill sets, the lack of data, the lack of information, the lack of tools, lack of instruments to actually effectively engage with customers at that level was what prompted me to start reinventing everything. And so 1999 was the launch of an agency that would really try to shake the entire foundation and see if I could create a different type of approach.
Who needed it most back then?
Consumer
products, or
it was business to business. It was consumer products. It was anybody really trying to influence a decision or influence a market, right? And we're still in that. These were early days of challenging the paradigm. So, for example, market pioneering. Most of those products didn't have markets, and so there wasn't necessarily demand for those products or companies or services. So you had to build demand or try to nurture it or cultivate it, much like what we see with companies that are doing today. So really, it was a long story to get to where we are here today. But at some point, I realized that my greatest contribution wasn't going to be to the marketing world. My greatest contribution was going to be to back off and start to document everything that I had learned, everything that I experimented with, to help other businesses, help other marketers, help other brands better understand how to shortcut it, to be more effective in engaging with their customers, their audiences, their markets, their communities, instead of having to fail and burn along the way.
I feel like you're one of these pioneers that's been out, 2-3 years, which is like light years in the technology space, ahead of the curve, kind of pioneering the space. How did you get into PR and public relations?
That was in the early 90s. That was by default, listening to those coworkers of mine at the time try to pitch technology to reporters and analysts. And it was always frustrating because it wasn't necessarily the biggest office, so I'd have to listen to this all day and day out, and at some point it would just rub me the wrong way. And I walked into the president's office and I asked for a shot. I said, "Look, I don't even know how anyone listens to these folks, because they don't know what they're talking about. They're reading off of a sheet of paper."
Yeah, it's just grinding it out.
Yeah, it's grinding. It's by the numbers. It felt like a boiler room. And that was my foray into public relations. I never really considered myself a public relations professional. I was just someone who was passionate about technology. I could translate that story into the benefits of whomever that technology was for, and then reverse engineer it. How do people get information? How do people make decisions?
Yeah.
What are their pain points? Does this meet that? If not, then reshape it for those channels. So it was this idea of maybe not even marketing at that point. I mean, it really was, I felt, doing a service for the people who could benefit from it. I became a believer and almost a user of those technologies. I was the voice of the customer, and in turn could bring it back to the customer.
Yeah, it seems like people is the general theme here. I mean, even the book title, putting the public back in public relations, but it's about people.
Yes.
The book you wrote back in the day.
That was my first, well, it was technically my second book, and I wrote that one with Deirdre Breckenridge. And that was sort of my contribution to the public relations industry, because I had never really thought I would be in public relations for the long term, right? It was about trying to bring people into the spotlight.
Yeah.
And so that was my sort of milestone in that regard as my knowledge was maturing, as I was trying to figure out my greatest impact within the organization. I realized that at some point, the best I could do for public relations professionals was to write that book, but in order to help them, in order to help marketers overall, my main focus and where I am today was to get to the C-suite, to help them better understand who those people were and what they were looking for.
Why? Is that because that's where change happens, or you think that's the best place to start?
I don't know that there's an answer to that. The real answer
Well,
is...
I struggle with that all the time, right? Do you start at the bottom to affect change and have it kind of crescendo in and up the ranks? Or is it better to start at the top and let it trickle down? I always wrestle with that.
The real answer is you work every end to the middle. And that's why this is difficult. That's why you can't be a champion. That's why you can't just be a marketer. If the real question is, are you a change agent? And I often don't like to use that word because it sounds so buzzy, but the reality is, are you a change agent? Yes or no? Because you can be a champion for social media, you could be a champion for the customer. But if you can't bring about change within the organization, then you can't bring about change within the organization.
Well, let's talk about that, because I know a lot of people are probably thinking the same thing. People watch this show, they're entrepreneurs, they have startups, or they're working as marketers in some big business, big or small. This idea of being a change agent, how does it start? Like, is it something you're born with? Is it something you have to decide to do? And then how do you do it? Like, maybe you want to make change in an organization, but you're afraid that if you step out there, stick your neck out, it's going to be on the chopping block, and then you're out.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah. Is that the risk you take?
No, I mean, maybe that might sound a little dramatic. The reality is that businesses need help. They're realizing that the direction that they're on now isn't necessarily the ultimate direction. They're seeing it in terms of their numbers. They're seeing it in terms of employee churn or morale. There are signs. And if leadership can't recognize those signs today, then maybe you're not within the right organization. But let's not even look at big companies. Let's look at entrepreneurs. Let's look at developers who are creating the next hot network or the next hot product, or Pinterest, right? Pinterest is 3 years old almost, and now people are starting to hear about it. At some point, the founders of that organization, I don't know if they ever thought about giving up, but I do know that they saw a different path. They saw a different way to provide something to customers, and they went after it. And that's what it starts with. You asked what it takes to sort of be a change agent. Well, the founders of Pinterest saw something that others didn't.
Okay, they identified a demand.
Right, and they executed against that when others didn't.
Try to solve a problem.
Yeah. Pragmatic marketing, right? Okay. So don't design for the sake of design for solving for something, or that you recognize an opportunity. And that's where it begins. And so within an organization, the same thing is true. What are we missing? What's that opportunity that we don't have? Or what is it, as I call it, digital Darwinism? What are we at risk of actually losing to evolution? Circuit City, Borders, Kodak. No one's safe right now. You're not too big to fail, and at the same time, you're not too small to succeed.
So if I recognize that something's wrong, I know it's broken, but I don't know how to fix it, then what do I do? Because all around me, people are saying, you got to jump into social, you got to do social. I mean, we're past that, right? I mean, we're no longer...
Are we?
Hopefully. At least people watch this show, I think, are with the program. But they may not have all the answers, so then what? I want to change, but I don't know how.
I think trying to get into social is how some people say that they are bringing about change. The problem is that they're not. The problem is that it's just the latest gravy train, right? It's just yet another, like websites were back in the day, or like CD-ROMs were back in the day. I mean, it's technology. So by embracing new technology, you're not necessarily bringing about change, but by recognizing an opportunity to fill with those channels, right? So what is that opportunity? we spent the last 60 days studying customer conversations, and we realized that we're just hated on these fronts, or that the way that people buy products, there's too much friction in terms of our model, or competitors are reducing friction in this regard. There's a lot of intelligence that's out there. And it's that intelligence that I use to answer the question, what is the real problem that we're trying to solve for? Because simply by creating Facebook and Twitter presences doesn't solve for anything. In fact, you might actually be creating more problems that way.
Sure. So it sounds like something a lot of people have said, it's not about tactics, it's about strategy, it's about purpose, it's about solving problems. Let's break that down a little bit, though, what you just said, and talk about some of the tools. Because you could say, I want to know what my customers are thinking. I want to know what they're saying. How do you go about doing that? What are some of these tools and maybe best practices that you could recommend?
Well, actually, I don't know that anybody really wants to know what customers are thinking. I mean, think about it. I'll answer your question in a second, but think about it for a minute. I think we oversimplify the problem that we're facing. And by that I mean that we've spent decades getting further away from customers. We've invested in automation. We've invested in horrendous technology where a human being won't even answer the phone.
Right.
You can't even get a human being. It's crazy. We live in a world where the biggest cell phone provider in the United States will drop every phone call as you try to call customer service.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think people want to get closer to the customers, but their actions don't say that. And all of their rewards mechanisms right now within the organization don't say that. How fast can you get someone off the phone? How quick can you turn? How many phone calls can you take? How many emails can you take?
Right.
It's bigger than that, right? And I think what we really need to do is take this opportunity to say social, mobile, all of these real time, all of these trends that are taking place right now are doing one thing, and that is empowering people. And it's also changing how they find and share information. It's also changing how they make decisions.
Right.
It's also changing how they support businesses. And at some point, we have to answer the question of what are we trying to do? And honestly, when's the last time any company you've worked with has read their vision statement or their mission statement and said, you know what? I am more inspired now than ever before, having reacquainted myself with those words. Doesn't happen because marketing wrote that. It's no inspiration there. This is that time. A lot of businesses I work with today, some of the biggest companies in the world will start right there. What are we trying to do? Because that's leadership. Because this is a different era for that. Once you have that question answered, then you can start to figure out what strategies look like, and then how these tools factor into the execution of those strategies, and how metrics factor into measuring your success or your progress within using those tools. We can't do anything until we know where we want to be or what we want to do when we get there.
Right. And the other part of the problem is I sort of imagine this roadmap, but we're talking about a brand new destination that doesn't exist on the current map, right?
I think so. I mean, the reality is that you probably have a great idea. You're probably designing great products and services. The disconnect, though, is how people find those or how people realize that those are valuable. I think, what are we approaching on iTunes right now? 25 billion app downloads. Say you develop an app. How is anybody going to find you? Or let's just say you have the next Pinterest. How's anybody going to find you?
Yeah.
And a lot of this starts with, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to deliver? I love the fact that everybody's talking about Clear, the new app for iPhone, where it's just a simple to-do app, but it was re-engineered. The whole idea of a to-do list was completely redesigned, rethought, to try to target someone who pinches their way through life, or who turns things and interacts with a medium differently than you or I used to interact with technology, or even how you and I used paper and pen. Because that's what we're talking about. And there's an emergence of a new type of person, a different type of consumer that's out there. These are the kids that walk up to the television screen and try to pinch the screen, or these are the kids who pick up a magazine and try to turn it. And these are people.
It's not going.
Yeah, exactly. It's just different.
Yeah.
So you and I still make decisions like we always have, but there's just different ways of making decisions. And the reality is that businesses have to consider those ways of making decisions. It's not a funnel anymore. We can't just design around this funnel.
Right.
It's this massive ellipse where all of these new touch points open up. And we have to both, number one, figure out where those touch points are, and then two, tap into them. Insights and also engagement. I think that Clear app did a really good job of recognizing who they were trying to reach and how they use products and technology and how they're going to be found. And then they activated every marketing channel to push those points that they were solving for. It's a brilliant app. I use this app. I also use a few other apps, but I use it just simply because it feels great. And you know what I love about that? And this is a big lesson for everybody, is they cared enough about my experience in the design of that app that they did everything they could to make sure that I found it and that I would use it and that I would love it.
How did they do that?
Oh man, that's all over the place. They first spent their time designing a wonderful and a remarkable app.
Okay.
Right? It's amazing to me how many people don't do that. I mean, everybody loves Zappos.
Sure.
Right? Everybody loves Zappos. And when you look at what they did so well, they designed every bit about happiness and customer service.
It's consumer experience.
Yeah, and that was designed. It wasn't just because Tony Hsieh one day woke up and said, I want everybody to be happy and we're going to deliver happiness.
It was deliberate, very much.
Absolutely, architected. The entire organization is structured formally around this,
Yep.
and that's a great thing.
And they're empowered.
Absolutely, and they're empowered, and there's reward systems that continue that empowerment. It's different. And they teach people, they teach other businesses about how to redesign organizations in the same way, whether it's replicating that model or redesigning the new model, much in the same way that Disney does the same thing with their university program. So the Clear app was the same thing. They had a deliberate strategy on what they were going to design. You know what happens when you have a deliberate strategy that delivers a remarkable experience? It becomes marketing in its own right. Everybody started talking about it.
Yeah.
So the guys just went to TechCrunch, they went to all the usual outlets like Mashable, and you know what their story was? We re-engineered the whole process so that you would have a remarkable experience around a simple to-do list. Oh my gosh, stop the presses, what? You mean you didn't just force create so that you could, based on the platform, so that we'd have some new app where we can pinch things and use the UI in a way that makes it remarkable? You mean you actually thought about me and what the experience was and how I think and how I plug things in and how I think about my to-do list and task list? And
so when you say that they found you, they knew where to get you because they knew that you read all those different blogs or sites, or was that what you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And more importantly, the story that they had to tell was shareable.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even, what if I didn't visit that blog? In fact, I don't think I visited a blog to learn about it at all. I think that showed up in my stream because everybody was talking about it. And I think that's what really this is about, is how do you not have to manipulate marketing when you could actually just help people become a part of your story because they really are a part of your story?
Well, I buy that, but the counter argument is, because what you're saying is just build a great product and people will come. But I think that there's a flip side of that too.
Well,
right?
actually, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
saying design a remarkable product,
Yeah.
but also because it's designed to do something, it has a mission and a purpose.
It's
right?
functional and it fits the need.
Well, it's not just functional. It doesn't just fit a need. I didn't need a new to-do list, but I did learn that there was a better way to do this because somebody was thoughtful about it, right? Then that story made its way to me. So the team actually went out to make sure that story, how they did it, why it's remarkable, found its way to me, right?
Okay.
Through blogs, through conversations, or what have you. So they designed a remarkable product, and then they made sure that it had a remarkable story, and that remarkable story was told throughout all of the channels where I am. They made information come to me, and that's how I found it. So it's part product, part service, but also part the delivery of a wonderful experience to you.
So what's the lesson here for people who've got these great ideas and maybe you have great products? Can you manufacture? I mean, that whole process sounds so easy and beautiful, but you can't manufacture that. What's the secret sauce? I mean, did that sort of all happen organically? Didn't the stars align naturally?
I don't know that anybody actually. I want you to think about that for a moment. How many people actually design incredible product experiences? Not just products. I mean, product experiences.
Yeah. Well, Facebook comes to mind, as something that's caught fire and has continued to expand beyond.
Sure. Virgin America, Apple, Zappos. They don't just create great products. They create great product experiences.
Yeah. Even car companies that are came out of the woodwork, we didn't know before, are now emerging, right?
Sure, absolutely. And again, it's not just because of the product, it's the whole experience. If you think about Virgin America, they treated that airline like a startup. How do you enter an industry where most customers hate the airlines that they fly, and where airlines are, look at American Airlines, having to file bankruptcy. Yeah. It's not the most lucrative market to enter, and it's not the most or least expensive to enter either.
Yeah, it's a mature industry.
So absolutely, but they decided to treat it like a startup, and they said, what do customers want? What do they don't want? What channels do they expect to find out about great experiences in? How do they want to communicate with their favorite companies in those channels? What makes a great experience? And they published all of those findings in what they called the Liminal Report, and I think there's so many insights in that report alone that any business could look at and say it's not just about the product, right? Although they did make an exceptional product. From the red carpet at the ticket counter to the purple hue lights when you step in the plane to the beats that you listen to as you're taking off. The entire experience is wonderful.
Yeah, and they have a pretty good front man.
Yeah, well, they do. But you can't help but just tell everybody about what a wonderful experience is. They deliver it in a way that you become part of their story, so that everybody that you talk to is influenced by your opinion.
So it sounds like going back to what you said in the beginning, it's about people, and it's about knowing your people better. Perhaps if we're making it a competition thing, if I'm competing against the same product in my category, it's about knowing my people better, so that I can deliver what they're asking for.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's part of. I know so. Let me give you a real interesting play on that, though. Right. So if you think about Apple, everything about Apple is meticulously designed. Everything about even pre-launch, to launch, it's all manufactured. Right. All of this. Did they leak this? Is it really coming?
Right.
It's brilliant.
I can't believe that they just coincidentally leave stuff in bars.
Yeah.
That's just. We expected to believe that now, and after.
Well, what had happened a second time, who knows? But the reality is that it goes further. It goes to the product itself. It goes to the box. It goes to the genius at the retail store. It goes to the shelves. It goes to the signage. Everything's designed to deliver a wonderful experience before, during, and after the transaction, and that's really important. That's thoughtful. A lot of businesses don't do that.
Right.
But look at Microsoft Windows and their new phone. I don't know if you've played with that interface, but it is beautiful.
Is it?
It is gorgeous. In fact, I might say that not to hate on the iPhone, but it is so beautiful that I would consider actually switching phones and networks. But the reality is that business, brands, products, there's also an element of self-expression that comes into what you use,
right,
too. And I just don't see myself as a Microsoft Windows consumer.
Well, Samsung's had a lot of fun with that too, right? Playing off that's their latest campaign.
Absolutely.
Kind of poking at the Apple.
But let me ask you a question, right?
Yeah.
So what if that phone wasn't the Windows phone any longer? And I'm sorry to everybody at Microsoft, but this I promise is a point that we can all learn from, and that is, what if it was the X phone, right? What if there was just this wonderful buzz coming out, like the phone left in a bar, and it had an X logo on it, and suddenly Windows, it wasn't going to be the Windows phone anymore, that the Xbox team was taking over the phone project, and that it was going to somehow link to the Xbox system and into the Xbox cloud, and this whole experience, right?
There's a little more cool factor to that. Absolutely,
right? And you can imagine all of the conversations that are taking place, and then they start to pull in Apple, and they start to engineer all of these rumors and these leaks, and they start to talk to all of the people in those channels, and the demand starts to increase, and suddenly you see that same OS and that same phone from a different lens, a different perspective. So sometimes a great product isn't enough. The entire experience, how it makes you feel when you're actually out using it, when you have a problem, it's all designed. And this is why I actually believe that it's harder now than ever to not just enter a marketplace, but succeed in a marketplace. Because when we talk about social media, or we talk about product design or great customer service, it's the whole organization that has to embrace this new vision, this new mission, and also a culture of this type of innovative approach.
Right. Is that the meaning of the end of business as usual?
Well, the meaning of the end of business as usual is actually a little bit, the whole book is about what we're talking about, but the meaning of the book was, I'd spent since the mid-90s looking at this idea of social media, right? Where you go into communities, where you become part of the community, where you don't just program editorial, but you become a resource to the community, where you take those insights from the community and you build better products and services and business out of it. What I learned along the way was that anytime you look at it from a technology perspective, you're going to lose.
Okay.
Once you start to figure out how consumers are making decisions and how they're influencing decisions, then you can actually start to design a better strategy. So the end of business as usual is a recognition that all of this is causing a different breed of customers to make decisions differently, to share and influence decisions differently. That's the end of business as usual. If you don't recognize how technology and culture are being impacted, then you can't adapt. And if you can't adapt, then you lose favor and you lose preference.
Right. Where do you think the space is heading? So here we are now, talking about social. There's larger adoption than there's ever been, but still we have a long ways to go. But where is it headed?
I think where it's headed is, well, first, for anyone watching now, we should probably define digital Darwinism. It's when technology and society evolve faster than your ability to adapt. Right there in that definition is where this is heading. Someone has to recognize an opportunity, and that's been the hardest thing for companies to do, because they're efficient in their processes, right? Businesses get better when they can become more automated and more efficient in those processes, when they can operationalize against things. And in that rigid model, it's really difficult to recognize an opportunity and shift to pursue it.
I think it's difficult to recognize, but I also think it's physically difficult, right? If you take a look at why a company like Vizio is having success, for example, it might be because those legacy brands have got millions and millions of dollars invested in tooling and other things. They can't change or adapt as fast, right?
Right, absolutely. I mean, and every market's open to disruption. Everything's open to disruption. So this is, the big trend is actually going to be how businesses invest in disruptive frameworks, right? So there are going to be teams designed to recognize those opportunities, and teams to pilot programs to test and learn based on those opportunities. Whereas you see things, and this exists within in some organizations today, right? P&G has labs. P&G experiments with some really interesting things to innovate within and then innovate externally. We're going to see much more of that, but more importantly, we're going to start to see adaptive frameworks and business models where this can touch the entire organization much faster, so it doesn't have to take so long to churn things out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too, we just have to have an idea of true customer and employee centricity. I often study businesses that have really wonderful social media strategies, only to learn that most of their employees have low morale because they aren't being recognized for how they're helping the business create this new public persona.
They're not a part of the process. They're not on the team.
Exactly. They're not a part of the process, part of the team. And we're looking at a holistic approach, right? Customers don't see functions and lines of businesses. When a customer needs something, right, do you think that Facebook addresses every customer need? Probably not. Most of it's used for marketing. Sometimes it's used for customer service, but there's greater needs than that. So
well, I personally still think Facebook is where people live and hang out for their personal lives. I think still, even with close to 1 billion people, I mean, still, we're just scratched the surface. I wanted to ask you, because I know you spent some time with Jim Farley over at Ford. How would you rank Ford, and what are they doing right, and maybe what are some of these opportunities?
Ford is doing a lot of things right. Actually, almost every element that we've talked about in this conversation, Ford is considering. Employees, culture of the organization, innovative business practices, and they're executing fast too. They're learning and they're putting this into products. And earlier when we talked about people, they're featuring their own people, their teams, their stories as to how this is coming about.
So people are feeling part of the process.
Absolutely.
They're feeling like they're getting hugged by the brand,
Absolutely. And everything about how Ford is doing is only getting better. Profitability, sentiment towards the brand, and they recognize that they're a long way off. They still have a long way to go. And the other thing about Jim is that he's willing to fight internally against the culture to do the right thing. The nice thing is that Alan Mulally has set the tone for what that culture should be.
Is it okay to make mistakes along the way? If you're a big brand like that, I mean, I would think what paralyzes a lot of these CMOs is fear of making mistakes. It's a new space. Someone like Jim, who's got a lot of guts and he's got a vision, but also got a CEO who's given his blessing. That's one thing. But what do you say to these people behind big brands when they are afraid of the blame game or afraid of mistakes?
It takes courage.
Is it okay to make mistakes out there?
Absolutely. It takes courage because you are going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But it also takes vision, takes leadership. I mean, these are things that, this is why it's about a change agent today. It's not just enough to see technology. It's actually seeing where you can be and using technology to help you get there. And that's really what this comes down to. It's time for a new era of leadership. And in Ford's case, Alan Mulally came in because it was time for new leadership. And he has come in and taken charge. Now, did Alan grow up using Facebook and Twitter? No. But he sees the greater purpose of this, and he recognizes that those tools can help him get there.
Well, and he's put good people around him, right? People
Absolutely.
like Scott Monty, people like Jim. So what if I'm a smaller company?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of these things, what are some of these mistakes that I should avoid in jumping into the social space? What if I'm, watching everything that's happening around me? I've maybe got a toe in the water. But what are some of these maybe rookie mistakes that I should avoid?
Smaller businesses really need to pay attention to what their experience is, right? And who they're trying to reach and how they're discovered. I think for the smaller business, the process of discovery is really interesting because they could be closer to it than a lot of big businesses can. So for example, they know how their customers find them today, but do they know how their customers are going to find them tomorrow? And one way to look at this as a disruptive model is when Yelp hit the scene, right? Small businesses everywhere started freaking out. Oh my goodness, the voice of the customer is going to be in a public place where they can see everything. And their first reaction to negative reviews was to try to get them removed.
Right. Oh, and they thought that people were gaming the system, right? That their competitors were
Yeah.
deliberately bad-mouthing them.
Yeah, which I'm sure has happened, and unfortunately there are a lot of stories, and this goes back to the days of Amazon where competitors do pay people to post those reviews. But a lot of those reviews are genuine. And I think back to this Chinese restaurant where a lot of people didn't like the soup. And all of the reviews were really negative about the soup. And it felt so bad hearing the story, too, because it's his great-great-grandmother's recipe.
Right. But it's just terrible.
But it's just terrible.
Yeah.
So of course, he was upset and hurt when he started reading all these reviews. But instead, he went back and re-engineered the soup. And then he went back to everybody who had written a negative review and asked them if they would come in and try the soup on him. They loved the soup.
Yeah.
And now they're loyal customers.
Okay.
And they all went back and changed their reviews and started talking about how even the approach of being recognized for that opinion was valued. Now they are his evangelists.
Yeah. Well, it's a great example because smaller companies can move fast. I mean, to change a recipe, maybe at Campbell's or a bigger company, Kentucky Fried Chicken. I don't know what the process is. McDonald's, I'm sure they have test kitchens everywhere, but maybe that's part of the opportunity.
It's a start, but also think about it this way. That wasn't even an answer to the question, right? When the answer is to become more discoverable by a different type of customer, Yelp is one of the answers, right? So what happens if I search Google for you? Yelp might actually come up, or a tweet might actually come up, or a blog post might actually come up. And it's understanding how you're discovered today and how you could be discovered. So search engine optimization, social media optimization, what's that story, defining that story,
Right.
and then making sure that everything that comes back points in a favorable direction.
Brian, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I've been speaking with Brian Solis, author of the book, The End of Business as Usual. Thanks so much.
Thank you.